Welcome to A Canadian Investing in the U.S., a podcast and YouTube channel focused on Canadians buying real estate with host Glenn Sutherland.
Welcome to another episode of A Canadian Investing in the U.S. This week my guest is Jesse Farb. Jesse, let's start with an intro.
Sure.
Let's let people know who you are.
Yeah, for sure, Glenn. And thanks for having me on your podcast. We just spoke over a week or two ago for the first time, and I love the content you've been putting out there. So much appreciated.
Thank you.
I'm a real estate broker here in Ontario, Toronto, GTA mainly. Also a mortgage agent. But how I got there was really through an investor mindset. I was investing in real estate just over a decade ago. I wanted to get into real estate and figure out how to invest, not knowing what I was doing. And I was able to do that. And shortly after doing that, I left my corporate job and just started investing and doing real estate work full time. So that includes a little bit of exposure to the U.S. around 2011, 12, shortly after the great financial crisis. So it's been a journey.
It sounds like a good time to join into to connect with the U.S. because that's probably when it was finally starting to circle back and do well again, right? So you probably were on the upswing, the very bottom at the upswing, I would think.
Yeah, exactly. Not that we timed it that way. It's just by the time I figured out where the opportunity was and to get in there, that's what it was. I only found this out years later when I was a very small boy. My parents had rented a cottage not too far from Toronto.
Yep.
It must have been, 5 or 6, and we get there. They rented it for a week or whatever, and I remember talking with my mom. She relayed the story to me. She said, "Well, how can we get to use this cottage right now?" And she said, "Well, we paid the cottage man some money."
Yep.
And, we get to do it here. And something about that really stuck with me. I said, wait a minute, you gave him money and then we get to use it and he does nothing. That's how it occurred to me at whatever age, 4, 5, 6. And so that was my earliest inclination of this idea of creating residual income, creating time, money, freedom.
So you bought your first rental property at the age of 6.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, beautiful cottage. No, nothing much happened, nor did I ever think about it for a long time.
Yeah.
There's a few events like that over my life, childhood that kind of spurred me to think I might have that might be where a passion is.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I was graduating university and they were building up new freehold townhouses near the university, and one of my buddies and his parents had started to buy them, rent them out to students, and that really piqued my interest. And then we graduated, we were all in business school, and everyone had jobs lined up at different corporations, and I rented my first place, and I was talking to my buddies. I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" "Oh, I'm working downtown. I'm renting over here." "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
I'm doing the same thing. So in the end, two of us ended up buying a house downtown Toronto at the time. Queen and Bathurst wasn't the nicest area going back, but we did. It was central. The third buddy said, "I'm going to get engaged soon, but I'll rent a room with you guys for a year. We're just at a university."
Yeah.
Anyway, that's how it started. Borrowed money. Didn't need a lot back then, and shortly after we moved out, kept the property and took out a HELOC, and everything snowballed from there. So that was my first taste into actually not at the age of 6, but
No.
21, 20, maybe 22 or so, getting started.
Yeah, no, that's still a really early age to get started on all this. So you got that first investment down, and then where did that lead to your financial freedom plan? Where did you go from there?
Well, there was no plan as such at that time. It was just it was more of an impulse and intuition, and where it led to was so we finished up the basement a little bit there, and we both had moved out, and we're just renting it out, and then took a HELOC out
Yep.
And two things happened. I'd have to check my calendar. But one, I replicated what I did, but with a few different partners.
Yep.
Started to get my family involved, one of my brothers and another close friend. And we did the same thing with another property in Toronto without the moving in part, although my brother had moved in. And around the same time, I had someone else I knew who was driving down to the U.S., to Michigan, in particular, and starting to buy, properties at 30, 40 cents on the dollar post-crash. Buying in bulk, discounted, which was all new to me. So from there was some JVs with him.
So what was their strategy for buying these? Would they find them on the MLS, the wholesaling, doing their own direct marketing? How did this guy find these 30 cents on the dollar properties?
It was through wholesalers or even at that time banks, like lender institutions who had the non-performing assets on their books, and negotiation really. Okay, well, you got buying one is what you do on MLS, but when you can put together some capital and buy 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's where they were coming from. And then there was rehab renovations to bring them up to rental standard. Now these properties were like $30,000, $40,000 at the time, and then you put $10K in for rehab, and so then you're all in $40,000, $50K.
Okay.
And these were outside of 8 Mile, north of 8 Mile, which is outside the proper city limits of Detroit, into the suburbs, like Warren, East Point, and that area. We knew that there was strong reinvestment because if you remember, the auto sector had collapsed before the housing sector a year or two prior, and the federal government in the U.S. had allocated at the time, I believe, billions of dollars, like saying no, we're not letting the automakers die. So we knew jobs would be there.
So then, what was the plan with these? Were you just were you buying them cash? Were you using financing? Was there refinances involved? How'd you kind of run through these?
These were cash purchases, and the plan was hold them, collect the cash flow, and then after they're seasoned for a bit, go back to a lender and refi. So we're essentially trying to create an infinite return because counting on a little bit of market appreciation over some time and stabilizing the portfolios, and then going back and getting some percentage of loan to value that would allow us to take 100% of our initial capital back out. And the first, we're buying in stages right now all at once, but the first few we were able to do that within, I want to say, like a year. And then we took that capital, you could recycle it and, buy more. But then it started to really take longer. Things were, recovering in the U.S. And so by the time we did the last refi, it was like 18 to 24 months out, I believe, from the time we had acquired it. But we did get all of our initial principal back out and then deployed it into, further transactions.
So for your lending for these refis, did you were your properties appraising over $75,000, I guess, or did you have some sort of actual bank in Michigan that would actually work with Canadians?
These were, I believe, hard money lenders at the time. So our rates then were high. They were actually lower than they are now for some of the things I've seen in the U.S. But
it's all relative.
So, it is. I mean, we're talking 2011, 12, 13, so it's quite some time ago. Yeah.
Okay, then that's an exciting story. With buying all those properties with cash, I'm thinking, what's running through my head, I'm like, that's a lot of cash to come up with. So were you coming up with all the principals yourselves, or were you just raising money, or what were you doing to pull off these cash purchases?
Everything, even from my first get-go into real estate's always been with partners. So same with the U.S. I had my own capital, which was fine, but then I had close friends or family who started to take note of what I was doing, and I saw the opportunity. So definitely working with, and that ties back into the financial freedom, because I think investing is a team sport, and I don't know how I would ever do what I wanted to do, let alone, can you imagine being like retired or financially free while your closest people to you are stuck in a 9 to 5, let's say. That's kind of like, what's the point? Like, good for you, but
yeah.
So my goal's always been to do it both for business and capital reasons, but also to help everyone around me and myself kind of elevate themselves towards a better financial position.
Cool. And then did you keep all of your houses in Toronto and your houses in Michigan? Like, you still have everything, or have you sold some of it off?
Yeah, everything in Toronto, yeah. And, we've been able to refi and pull capital out of there. One of them I did sell in Michigan, and mainly because one of my capital partners wanted that capital back. So we sold that at a pretty good profit. 6 years out, right, kind of thing.
Yeah.
All the rest we've refied. No, we haven't refied. We've been able to have tenant changeover, rent increases, and so we still collect everything from those properties.
To lead to your financial freedom, you can share this or not, but like, how many houses did it take till you were you're comfortable enough to leave your job? And like, was it a certain number of houses? Was it certain? You don't have to say be specifics on numbers, whatever. But like, was it like a cash flow? Like, what was your did you have a freedom number in mind while you're planning for it? Yeah, sure. I for sure did have some metrics involved, and when I left my corporate job, which wasn't in real estate, I was in management, and prior to that, business development and marketing. I left without having any of that. I just knew I had reached 5 years and things were good, but I just asked myself whether I wanted to look back in another 5 years and still be working for someone else, and was this really what I wanted to do? And the company was great, the people were great. It wasn't anything. I left on very good terms. It was a tough decision. It took about 8 months. And when I finally spoke to my boss, she said, Jesse, good luck in real estate, and if it doesn't work out, we'll have your management job or one like that here for you. And after. I said, I wish I called you 8 months ago. I would have just left then, and then, because that was all the fear and everything. But I left, and I didn't have the cash flow. I didn't have financial freedom. I didn't really know what I was going to do, actually. I was just starting to do the U.S. stuff. I had one house, the second house in Toronto, closing the same month I left my job. So I spent all month with my brother on that one, long days and getting it ready for September, and we did. And but to answer your question, over my journey in education and learning from others, the thing that really mattered to me was kind of picturing a teeter-totter, where whatever my income was through my quote-unquote 9 to 5, I could equal out or balance with cash flow, residual income. And for me, that point when those two were equal, I effectively could maintain my lifestyle without doing whatever I was doing here, which at the time was selling real estate as a broker. And so that's always the goal. And so it changes. So it could change though, because if my goal when I left my job was, let's say, over here, this amount of money, and I reached it, that could be fine, and I could just maintain my lifestyle. I'm not talking about becoming a movie star. It had to do with where I was currently at, and then effectively doing that. So no, it's a common thing I hear, is that people. They set this mark, right? If I hit this certain amount of cash flow, then I can equal my job and then I can leave. But then you go, well, but then, hey, I have some stuff coming up and I still want my thing. And the hurdle keeps jumping. And a common theme I keep hearing from guests who leave their job is that they take the plunge. They just take a stab at it, and they tend to leave before they actually are completely even, and they figure, once I have the time, I will fill in the rest of it. I'll figure out how to fill it in. And I guess you have some cash reserves to survive for a little bit until you fill in the gaps. Is that kind of how does that sound accurate?
Yeah, I think that's very common. I think that's a human tendency. We're never satisfied, and that's why I think it brings up a good point. I think the idea of financial freedom or retirement, and I don't mean I want to go sit on a beach 364 days a year. It's not my thing. I want to be active. I want to be building and doing something. But I do think the idea of retirement is a mindset shift more than anything.
Right.
Otherwise, we're always doing what you said, almost there, got there, move the goalpost. So I do think it has a lot to do with mindset.
So you've reached the financial freedom. What does your business look like today? Are you still acquiring houses? Are you more doing the broker side? Like what does it look like today?
Yeah, last year was very heavy actually on the Greater Toronto Area broker side. So as a realtor, I was helping people buy investment properties, sell their homes, whatever, find the right people for them to work with outside, like in Peterborough and other places, just because of people wanting to leave. So that's where I spent the majority of time last year, more than others, and still managing and overseeing the capital that's deployed. This year, big goal is to re-enter into the U.S. And this is why I have reached out to you, because I was trying to refamiliarize myself with what's going on and strategies and structures and all the issues that Canadians face today. So
lots of stuff.
yeah. So you've got so many podcasts that I've got it's like my reading list is one getting through all the different episodes.
It's funny, like a lot of times I forget how many episodes and how long they are, and I'm always like, some people ask me some questions, like, just go through and listen to all the episodes, and I was even just trying to catch up and refresh myself with some of the old ones, and I was like, man, this is going to take me a month to get through this, because I'm like, sometimes there were some really good guests, and it's just been a long time since I heard them and everything. I'm like, I think we're by the time this show airs, I think we're going to be in year 3 of this show. So it's it's to go back, like you're just not as sharp on some of these. There's always little tidbits then from years ago that I'm like, I could refresh even on my own show and remember some stuff. Even hearing some people's voices, I'm like, I remember this now.
Oh, wow, yeah.
But anyway, it's totally side tangent. Anything else we want to cover in this?
Yeah, there's so much we could talk about. I mean, what are I don't want to flip it on you, but what's going on a little bit in terms of what you're seeing now in the U.S. and even there's so much going on, politically, economically, all the health crisis.
You know what? This is a good idea. Let's flip it, because I don't get enough for people talking, well, unless I'm talking myself, but no one's actually asking me questions. With my business, we're playing it extra safe right now. So, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty in Ontario and in the U.S. A lot of people think that's just the U.S. Just for an example, my house I live in right now, I had a realtor look at it in the start of summer and had a realtor look at it at the end of summer, and the price went up by $80,000. My house, and you're like, that's scary. That is, it sounds really good, but even if we just went back, because COVID, they've put a lot of pressure on, because there's not enough houses for sale, but there's still a lot of people trying to enter the market, and there's still a lot of people trying to move, and there's just not enough inventory. So it's putting all this upward pressure on the prices. But what's scary is, even if we everyone's like, in my neighborhood, they're like, I'm going to wait till spring. Spring's always the best time to sell. So they're going to wait until spring, and right now, my whole subdivision, 0 houses for sale. There's, 500 houses here, 0 for sale, right? But you wait until spring, everyone's getting ready for spring, and the same subdivision is going to have 50 for sale, and it's going to change the pressure levels, right? And I think that a lot of people are going to be in trouble, even if it just goes back to pre-COVID prices, which would drop that same $80,000 back. People have refinanced and bought. The big thing this summer was buying boats. The boat prices went nuts. My friend was selling his boat that was 6 or 8 years old for more money, or the same money as he bought it for 6 or 8 years ago, which is insane because boats depreciate like crazy. But there's in these people are putting all kinds of upward pressure and they're spending the money is the problem. So it could be some problems here. Similar thing. I just use that because it's like right here and I have the actual numbers. But there's a lot of upward pressure and there's a lot of mortgage deferrals happening. So I'm just being extra careful in both countries. So my buying criteria is just getting very tight. I don't want to be doing long renovations as much as I used to do these. Some of them would take almost a year. Like we're doing huge, like gut down to the studs, rebuild everything, and that's a risky bit played right now, right? You go, well, the bigger the rehab, the better the price you're going to buy it at, and there's more spread in it. But for the timeline, I don't want to be in projects that long. I want to be in projects for like 4 months or less. Mm-hmm. So my timelines have shrunk. What I'm willing to do, I'm not willing to do the big rehabs anymore, at least to the same extent. And it's just being safer. And my 2021 is shrinking markets. I'm just the bookkeeping and looking through the financials. It's just I'm too spread, right? Because I'm working really in 5 markets, and in some markets we have several property managers. So you're like, it's just there's so many portals to log into. There's so much stuff. So I've been like, let's narrow this down. And you're like, okay, well I only have, say some of the property managers, they are only holding like 2 of my properties. So you're like, well, they're small, right? They're in my opinion, like for what they're holding of me. So either I move those properties to a property manager that has a whole bunch of my properties, or maybe it's time to sell those properties, right? So, and that's where we're going. We're planning on exiting several markets and just focusing on 2 or 3. And there's different reasons for each one. Like what I always talk about on my show with each market has its perks. Some of them cash flow like way over the top, and some of them, but they don't appreciate it all. And then there's markets that are the opposite, and they get like all appreciation and no cash flow, and I don't even touch those ones. Or there's the ones that are kind of hybrid, right in the middle, and you get a good cash flow and you get a good appreciation. And you know, those are good, but you still, I kind of, it's almost like doing mutual funds. They always say like diversify, so I just pick some different markets because they all work on different cycles. And so if you have certain cities get hit harder by COVID-19, for instance, there's more vacancy in some cities, like more the tenant mentality. More tenants don't pay in certain cities. In certain cities, the industries that the people are working in are just working from home, and that doesn't really affect them. And it also goes into what class of tenants, right, are you working with, right? So maybe those C-class tenants they're having trouble because they work in like as a teller, right? And there's a lot that right now in Canada it's effective, but right now in the States they're open, right? So for a bit, like when they did the first lockdown, the teller jobs disappeared, right? But the people who were working from home, who had more like B-class neighborhood jobs, they do fine. So even it's been like a kind of diversification. You want to go deep, not wide, but you also need to be a little wide so that all your eggs aren't in one basket, because everything's running in different cycles, especially, and they're like putting extra pressure on each thing, right, at certain points, right? So kind of spreading out, kind of playing it really safe. My goal for the last week of December was to get 5 properties, and I looked through. It took like 2 days. I actually recorded a podcast while I was doing it, and I was talking about doing it. But I put in like 2 days of like 12-hour days of just looking through property after property after property. Look through like hundreds and hundreds of these wholesale properties. Right here I have all my corkboard and my whiteboard, and it was just covered. And the ones that were like, and I rated them, and I did my whole thing, and I put out about 12 of them, hit my criteria, and I put offers on them. To the wholesalers, because I don't even like to pay wholesaler prices. And I got 0. 0 out of, and I was so frustrated. I'm like, oh my God, I just put like 20 or 24 hours in, and I got nothing. But you just keep pushing, right? That's the hard, like they always say this in books, but it's really hard to do. and you're like, okay, let's get back to the drawing board. Every deals keep coming in, and you're like, let's go through more. Let's go through more, and maybe we look at some different types of deals, right? So you can, like, different markets have different deals. So I usually am doing, like, I don't look at buy and holds in Florida because their rent to value ratio isn't good compared to in Ohio and Indiana and Alabama, Missouri, the other markets I'm in. It has the lowest out of the things. So you're like, well, that's really a flip market. But the part that you forget is Florida has more lending for Canadians, and we can get higher leverage rates and lower interest rates. So I started looking at, some foreclosures and stuff like that, and you're like, maybe some of these could work as long-term rentals, but it changes things. You're now using a higher leverage instead of a better deal, but they still will cash flow about the same because of all these weird factors that play into the thing.
Yeah.
And then I started looking at lower priced houses. I usually want my ARV to be at least 75 so that I can refinance. Usually that's like the minimum sort of numbers for after repair. I'll still buy houses for $5,000, but I want to make sure they're in a neighborhood that'll appraise for 75 when I'm done. And so I started looking at ones that don't appraise for that, and you could buy these houses for cash and then lease option and sell them, right? So they're just looking at different strategies to do it. And people go, well, that sounds a little risky because you can't do the refi. Well, yeah, but we're buying them really cheap, and we'll have an exit plan and a deposit. And when you start thinking about it, if you bought, like, say, a $20,000 house and you got them to give you a $3,000 or $5,000 deposit, percentage-wise, that's a really high percentage for a deposit, right? A non-refundable deposit. So it's one of those things you're like, and maybe looking at buying some Section 8 properties. I have a few Section 8 properties, but there's people selling them with Section 8 property. Also, if anyone's a pro on Section 8, I'd love them to come on the show, because I want to figure out how to more validate Section 8 when you're buying. Because people are like, oh yeah, it's Section 8, but I just don't. I've had my property managers set up Section 8, put Section 8 in, but for me to buy one with Section 8, I just don't really need to learn the process of how to verify that is legit, that those are Section 8 and not just regular tenants. Probably a super easy search, but I haven't figured it out. But
Yeah. But I do know that there's local Section 8 housing offices. They're not called Section 8 housing offices, but they're it's basically the city and municipality's local housing social assistance. But also the other one that I have seen is from people who are selling Section 8 properties is they can show you a copy of their rent payment, which comes basically from the U.S. government. So if they've got that, then at least it's one end of the line way to know that, okay, the tenant was verified at some point and the government's verified it, and anyhow. But that's a very interesting idea with the Section 8 properties. I did find a lot of them are in the neighborhoods where we're not going to hit the minimum ARVs really for cash out or refi. So you're getting,
it is a way. It's guaranteed rent, or at least partially guaranteed rent.
Yeah.
And if they're in uncertain times, it might make sense to take them on. They always say there'd be extra wear on the property, and that's some of the times I'm like, well, they're like, oh, they sell it as this Section 8 has been here for 15 years, and you're like, when was the last inspection? Who's been in this house? What shape is it in?
That's actually it, and that's a very good point. My understanding is each city it's a little bit different on how. But the good thing about Section 8 actually is the voucher that the tenant gets for them to be there. They actually are required to meet certain criteria. So the landlord for sure has to maintain the property and so on, but if the Section 8 tenant is not taking care of it or they're damaging it, and then that gets dealt with management, that's going to be really bad for them for being in the Section 8. So I actually found, every tenant's different, but there is an incentive built in for the property to be taken care of, sometimes even more than a regular tenant. Yeah.
I would definitely agree that it's more than a regular tenant. I've had properties that were completely rent ready, and when a Section 8, they do their inspection, they will find the tiniest little things, like a door handle squeaks.
Right.
They will find all kinds of tiny things, like, that they'll make you fix it, like, in order to do it. Even if you're like, we were planning on flipping this house, you're like, it's pristine, and they're like, no, they'll find stuff. They will find stuff.
That's their job. They have to, give you a few items to deal with. I mean,
well, it's just like a home inspector. You go get a home inspector to do your house. No matter what house, you could have it. Someone inspect it. Like we were selling something, you have an FHA inspection done, and they will go through and they will pick out the tiniest things. And so you fix it all, and then that person can't close because they actually, they've had the condition of financing, and they didn't actually have their financing. So it goes back on the market. You try and sell it a second time, get another FHA inspection, and they find the tiniest other different things, even though you've already fixed and passed an FHA inspection like 2 weeks before.
Yeah.
They will find more tiny things.
Yeah.
So it's very similar. It's very picky.
Yeah, for sure. Back to a point you made earlier, you were talking about being cautious this year or so far, and there's lots of reasons to do that. But also, you're saying about your neighborhood in particular, and I've been, with all the stimulus money that the Canadian government and the U.S. government and the trillions more coming in the U.S.
Yep.
It's I think any asset, and there's obviously going to be ups and downs in supply and demand, but in general, asset prices are where we're going to, I believe, see inflation, including real estate prices, because all that money is trickling its way to basically to anyone who has an asset. It's not actually going, in my opinion, to the people who need it the most, or not enough of it. But if you're all these banks and you have all this money left, right, and there is low supply, and people want to refinance or sell and acquire new, and with rates being so low, so I think real estate prices, both here as you've already seen, and a lot of the U.S. markets have no choice but to increase. I'm not saying that's a great thing either.
No, but it's almost like if you're going to compare it to gold, right? Like gold doesn't actually go up in value. What happens is the dollar keeps getting pushed down in pressure, and it becomes less valuable. And gold is the standard, and it just stays the same. But it just depends where you're looking from. If you're all sitting on the dollar and you're watching it go down, you're looking up, and that gold is getting more and more expensive. I know real estate isn't gold, but it does have inflation will cause houses to be more expensive.
Well, yeah, exactly. To your point, that what's inflating, what's getting ballooned up, is the number of dollars, on the books. It's not the number of gold bars or houses in a neighborhood. So it never has anything to do with the asset. It's always a relationship between how many dollars are chasing the same amount of goods and services. And so, it's not like the house is changing necessarily or the gold's changing, but there's just trillions more dollars that have been circulated into the economy in the U.S. And I was just looking at Canada's, out of all the G7 countries, has spent the most as a percentage of GDP. I don't know what we're at now, like 400 billion or whatever it was.
Yep.
And that's the highest percentage for any government that's put back into their economy in response as a percentage of GDP. So, I think it's going to be very volatile. Being cautious is good. But at least on my end, I'm still looking at the cash flow. Yep. And I know the market's going to go up and go down. I think I don't buy for appreciation. I'm not counting on this inflation to help make a deal work. And it seems over time, most markets where there's jobs and people and, income and low rates, we'll see what happens.
And you do the multifamily argument every time, right? So if you were going to buy one house and your tenant doesn't pay you, you have to cover that mortgage yourself, right? So it doesn't have to be multifamily, but maybe if you're doing this, it may make sense to buy more than one house, have a few of them, and that cash flow really good. So as long as a few of them are paying, the whole thing will pay all the mortgages. If you're using mortgages, that is. If you're dealing in cash, then you're really safe. Like, if you're, some of these houses you can like rent these really cheap places for $700 or $800 a month, and $700 or $800 a month if you're all in cash is you're as long as you have like 1 out of your 10 properties. Like, you paying rent, you'll cash flow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Depends what level of leverage, right? And that's just the same thing. If you're talking about Florida, then you're putting higher leverage on, and then, hey, if one tenant isn't paying the rent, you're going to have a more difficult time than if you're sitting at a lower leverage point, like typical hard money at 65% loan to value, and you're sitting down there, your mortgages typically should be cheaper because you have less mortgage. Mind you, the rates are a little higher, so it's a juggle game, right?
Everyone is so different, like you said, right? Every market, and then learning which levers you can kind of pull and push. But so you're scaling down, you think, into just a few of your markets this year?
Yeah. So we're still we just put an offer last night in Florida. We have, I think, one under contract in Ohio. And we have 2 more. Are they under contract? Or basically, we have offers out that are like verbally committed to, but not signed. So basically, we have three in Ohio and 1 in Florida. Yeah, so we're still going, but I'm actively getting out of Indiana completely. They have a department there called BNS, and they make it very difficult to do renovations. We're doing a renovation and we just get slapped with fines for unsafe building, but we're like, it's under renovation. So it's this ongoing battle with them. So I'm like, I'm just not dealing with you anymore. You're not, you say you're an investor friendly state, but you make my life way too difficult. Right. So, and you have to go to these online courts to fight each little violation. And whereas most states, they give you a warning and then you fix the thing. They're like, oh, like you have a dumpster and it's on the sidewalk or something. And you're like, okay, well, let's get it moved, and you have 15 days to comply. Or, but there it's just like, here's a few $100 fine, right? And you got to go fight it. So I'm like, you know what? It's about the lowest hanging fruit. They have amazing landlord laws and a lot of amazing things there, but just the one thing just bothers me so much. I'm just. They're gonna lose me. I'm gonna stop fixing up their neighborhoods.
They're lost for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
Anyway, Jesse, we talked way longer than I was expecting to talk, but it was good. Like, we went into some other interesting spots that we don't normally talk about, which is good. I think there's a lot of value in this show. I don't know if I might even break it into 2 because it's almost like we almost changed gears and went a different way halfway through. But thanks for coming on the show. If people wanted to get a hold of you, have a conversation, track you down, how would they do so? Oh,
good question. I guess the easiest way would be send me an email. It's jessefarb@gmail.com. JESSE, F like Frank, ARB for Bob. I mean, I'm just thankful to be on the show. I'm glad we could chat and I could pick your brain and I could share a little bit about my story. So definitely looking forward to hearing your other episodes and talking to you soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much.